The Chicago Plot. I've never made a video about the Chicago Plot, but recently a commenter brought up the Chicago Plot, saying it was a blueprint for Dallas. I asked him why he needed a blueprint for Dallas, and he didn't seem to have an answer for that. The Chicago Plot is interesting. I told this guy that I thought it was a red herring, but I decided to look at it again. And the Chicago Plot, as my graph here is meant to illustrate, is actually two plots. There's a plot reported by Abraham Bolden, who was a Secret Service agent, who's famous for reporting this plot and then being charged with and convicted of taking a bribe regarding his treasury duties. And he reported a plot that involved 4 Cuban snipers. And then there's Thomas Vallee, whom Bolden never mentioned. But he's the guy that the shills and idiots will say is the Chicago's Oswald. And that's why it's a blueprint for what happened in Dallas. And I think this might be worthy of a little video, so here I am. Bolden was not interviewed by assassination investigators until 1978, when the HSCA interviewed him. I'm going to read from their report here. Bolden told us that around October 30th, 1963, he recalled a long teletype message coming into the Chicago office from the FBI. It was unusual, he told us, for the FBI to cooperate on any cases with the Secret Service. But Mary Cooney, a clerical person working in the office at the time and now believed to be deceased, took this message to the supervising agent in charge, Maurice Martineau. Prior to the telex, there was a phone call from the FBI. Bolden doesn't know if it was a local FBI, Chicago, or Washington headquarters calling. So we have this unusual occurrence where the FBI is informing the Secret Service of a threat to the president. There were only about 13 agents in the Chicago Secret Service office at the time, and the substance of the teletype and the telephone call alleging a threat against the life of the president on an upcoming trip to November to Chicago was quickly disseminated. Surveillance was undertaken by agents on 2 of the 4 subjects identified with the threat. Because Bolden was black, he and another black agent, Conrad Cross, were excluded from the north side of Chicago surveillance because it was predominantly a white neighborhood. Through a series of blunders, the surveillance was blown by Agent J. Lloyd Stocks, and 2 subjects were apprehended and brought into the Chicago Secret Service office. Bolden's awareness of the progress of this surveillance came partly from office gossip and partly from his monitoring the Secret Service radio channels in his car. In any event, he said Agent Stocks was the subject of some earthy comments from his fellow agents. So the Secret Service blows their cover, and apparently the investigation is sabotaged by that. Bolden recalls that James Rowley called from Washington and suggested that James Rowley is the head of the Secret Service, suggested that Martineau use a COS file number. Bolden explained that a CO for Central Office number was issued only in or from Washington headquarters, and an S for secret or sensitive was given when they wanted to sequester information contained in the file. So they're trying to keep this very secret. He explained that these files were kept separate from all others and that the Secret Service could say that they had nothing in their files on a subject when in fact a COS file existed. He said as far as he knew, these were never destroyed, underscoring ours. In addition to the COS file number, Bolden said that all agents who were involved in this surveillance activity were told by Martineau to turn in their notebooks. All memos were typed, he told us, by Charlotte Klepkowski, who is now working at headquarters in Washington and is close to retirement age. Now, don't expect her to tell you anything. She is very loyal to the service and wouldn't say anything she thought would hurt them in any way, he told us. The memo copies were all sequestered by Charlotte on this surveillance. So all the information is stashed away, and as we found out later, it was destroyed, and no information now exists on this investigation. Or no official documents exist, just Bolden. Bolden recalls that in addition to Stocks, agents Strong, Motto, and Noonan were involved in the apprehension of the two men. On Saturday morning, November 2nd, Bolden was in the office early. He recalls that the interrogation rooms were littered with cigarette butts and coffee cups, evidence of a night-long interrogation. He saw only one of the two men they had apprehended. He describes this man as a swarthy, stocky, a truck driver type, is the way he described him. The man was 5'9" or 5'10", wearing a jacket and shirt with an open collar. His hair was dark, and he had a crew cut, which is described as a Detroit style. The writers showed Bolden our committee mug book containing 1 through 71 and 73 through 81, and he stated that the facial structure of photo number 74 was similar to that of the subject being questioned by the agents in the office. Picture number 74 is listed as unidentified, possibly Jim Braden. It is directly underneath Thomas Vallee's picture in the mug book. Vallee, number 76, was not recognized by Bolden at all. Although he was familiar with the case, which was described in the article written by Edwin Black in the Chicago Independent, a now-defunct publication dated November 1975. On page 10 of this article, entitled The Plot to Kill JFK in Chicago, November 2, 1963, 20 days before Dallas, the writer is checking all arrests in the city of Chicago. He says, then we checked every arrest in the entire city on those days. Who arrested them? Why? Any weapons? It took weeks. In the process, we developed leads, looked for Cuban names, looked for the name Bradley, looked for the name Braden. Nothing came of it. So apparently all the information had been disappeared. Bolden recalls that one of the two men had a Spanish-sounding name. He said the Secret Service agents took their pictures with a Polaroid camera. The agents' notes were typed up, and the memos were then taken to O'Hare Airport and given to a crew member of a commercial flight to Washington, where he believes a Secret Service employee met the flight and delivered the material to headquarters. The two suspects in Chicago were turned over to the Chicago police, who took them away in a patrol wagon. He recalls that at least one of the two had a Spanish-sounding name. He says that twice, and I underlined it there because there seems to be reason to think these were Cubans, and they would have Spanish-sounding names. While attending a refresher course in Washington in mid-May 1964, Bolden was returned to Chicago on a subterfuge and subsequently arrested and charged with soliciting a bribe, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy in an alleged attempt to sell Secret Service file information to a Chicago counterfeiter. His first trial in July 1964 resulted in a mistrial, his second trial a month later in a conviction. He was sentenced to serve 6 years. He appealed, and in June 1966, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the case. So, apparently, he was put away to shut him up, is the way I see that. And that interpretation is supported by what is reported in this 1967 CIA document, in which it's quoting a published piece in a newspaper. Bolden's attorney claimed that Bolden had told him that he had been sent to prison after having been refused permission to tell the Warren Commission about the alleged information. The HSCA report I just read from doesn't mention this, but while he was in Washington for his training course, Bolden claims he tried to get to talk to the Warren Commission about his information from Chicago. and that's what's reported here in the Google AI mode when I Googled about it. Arrest and silencing. Just as he was attempting to make contact with the commission, the Warren Commission, Bolden was arrested on federal bribery charges. He has long maintained that these charges were trumped up to silence him and prevent his testimony. And I think that's a reasonable conclusion. And in 2022, Bolden was pardoned by Sleepy Joe Biden. Also regarding the Cuban plot, there's this that comes from the Wikipedia entry on the Chicago Plot, which the footnote identifies as coming from a James Douglas interview with Bolden. So this information comes from Bolden through a James Douglas interview, apparently. The following day, the Secret Service obtained an important tip from the Chicago police, which originated from the landlady of a Chicago rooming house. She had just rented rooms to 4 men. She had seen 4 rifles with telescopic sights in one of the men's rooms, together with a newspaper sketch of the president's route. Now that last part, a newspaper sketch of the president's route, doesn't appear in the official documents, and that's why I wanted to include it here, because if this is true, this is a very strong indication that these 4 presumed Cubans were intending to shoot the president. So this is the plot that's on the left in my graph here, my graphic. Abraham Bolden reports this plot involving what I call 4 Cuban snipers. But then there's Thomas Vallee. And this is from the mugshot from Vallee's arrest in Chicago, presumably for suspicion of being involved in the plot. And this is what the shills and idiots glom onto. They glom onto Thomas Arthur Vallee because he was an ex-Marine, just like Lee Harvey Oswald, because he had been stationed at a U-2 base in Japan, just like Lee Harvey Oswald, and because he had trained anti-Castro fighters, just like they think maybe Lee Harvey Oswald did, even though there's no evidence that he did. So this is the blueprint. Thomas Arthur Vallee is the blueprint for Lee Harvey Oswald. And there actually is some documentation on Thomas Arthur Vallee from 1963 from this FBI teletype. He was a nut. Apparently he was a gun nut. He had guns in his car and he had some ammo in his car. But there's no evidence presented whatsoever that he had anything to do with any plot to kill the president, or with the 4 Cubans who had rifles reported by the landlady. So there's no evidence at all that Thomas Arthur Vallee was involved with any plot to assassinate JFK. And apparently he died in 1988, and nobody ever talked to him, as far as I can tell. And no official investigators even tried to talk to him, as far as I can tell. And if maybe they didn't want to talk to him because they would have found out there's nothing there. And the shills and idiots want there to be something there because it's a great diversion from what was really happening in Chicago, which was those 4 Cubans. They were the plot. Thomas Arthur Vallee is the red herring. So the shills and idiots will take this crazy guy, Vallee, as an analog for Oswald, which is, woo, look at that. That can't be coincidence. And then they'll conflate it with the Arthur Bolden thing, make Bolden into a hero, because they like having heroes in their stories. And they'll make it seem like that this was one of the many plots to kill Kennedy that the evil conspirators had. But the trouble with doing this is that it precludes it being a conspiracy that includes the Secret Service. And as I have demonstrated, as is clear in the evidence, the Secret Service was involved with this plot So if you believe their red herring conspiracy theory here about the Chicago plot, it makes it look like the Secret Service couldn't be part of the plot. That is, the shills and idiots are trying to get you to go ooh and ah over here about this thing that has to be something, because this Vallee guy is kind of like Oswald. And they do this in order to make you think it's not an inside job. If it was an inside job in Chicago, they would have just killed him in Chicago. But instead, the Secret Service disrupted the plot in Chicago. Why would they disrupt their own plot? See, the shills and idiots are trying to confuse you. But the plan was set up for Dallas because that's where the conspiracy had their power. John Connally, the governor of Texas, was part of the conspiracy. LBJ, the vice president, was part of the conspiracy. And these are two power brokers in Texas and Dallas. They could control Dallas, and the Dallas police was an integral part of this conspiracy. There's nothing going on in Chicago. Well, nothing from the inside job conspiracy. Castro probably did have 4 shooters up there. Castro was trying to kill Kennedy, and Castro doesn't care if it happens in Chicago or Dallas. He just wants it to happen. But the inside job has planned for Dallas, so they don't want anything to happen in Chicago. They probably wouldn't mind if Kennedy was killed in Chicago, but they don't want to go wrong and then for Dallas to be canceled. They've got Dallas planned, and they want Dallas to go on, and they don't want it canceled because of some weird thing happening in Chicago. And that's why the shills and idiots want you to go ooh and ah about Chicago, so that you don't realize that it was an inside job. So because the Cuban plot has been infiltrated by the inside job plot, the FBI knows that Castro has got something planned for Chicago. So they inform the Secret Service that, hey, we got to stop this Chicago thing. They stop the Chicago thing, but they don't want an investigation that puts information on the record, so they intentionally blow their cover, and this disrupts the Chicago plot, and the Cubans have to pull out of that one and concentrate on Dallas, which is what the inside job plot wants them to do, because the inside job plot is for Dallas. And the Chicago plot functions now as a red herring, even though it does have some significance. It displays what was being done, but the inside job plot was never going to shoot Kennedy in Chicago.